I am grateful that my counterpart, the ranking member of the committee, allowed you to see, Madam Speaker, what I live with on a daily basis, which is a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome.
The gentleman from Texas says that the Biden administration is weak. I guess the gentleman and I have a different definition of what weakness looks like. It was Republicans, by the way, not Joe Biden, who held up aid for our allies for 9 months because their side buys into Kremlin propaganda. I think that's weak, quite frankly. It was a Republican president who went to North Korea and tried to get a brutal dictator to like him. He actually said that they wrote each other love letters. He went there and groveled to Kim Jong-un. I don't think that that's a sign of strength. I think that's a sign of weakness. It is the Republican candidate for president who praises Putin on a regular basis, calls him Vladimir, loves Xi Jinping, says Viktor Orban is fantastic. So don't ever lecture us about human rights when you can't bring yourself to be critical of what the Republican standard bearer says on a regular basis. That's not strength. That's pathetic.
I apologize to the country that they had to put up with that. But again, this is my life in the Rules Committee. Trump derangement syndrome is alive and well, and put forth on virtually every argument that goes forth in the Rules Committee. I'll reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I would just say to the gentleman from Texas, I'm sorry that I guess hurt his feelings with some of the things I've said, but it's the truth, and I guess the truth hurts.
Mr. Speaker, as the only New Yorker on this side of the aisle today, I can tell you that I have seen firsthand what happens when a Democrat-run state bows to the radical left and embraces an unaccountable system of charitable bail funds and institutes full-blown bail reform. Violent offenders are getting a free pass, while law-abiding citizens are left to suffer. Look at the facts. The New York City, after bail reform, crime jumped 20% after they pushed forward this in the name of social justice. Judges can't even set bail for crimes like petty larceny or grand larceny or burglary. And who pays the price? Innocent American families. Now, unfortunately, my home state of New York is just one of many Democrat-run states in jurisdictions around the country that have given criminals a get-out-of-jail-free card. What's worse is that these policies have the full backing of the Democratic Party, including their nominees Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Harris, in particular, supported these radical bail funds, actively encouraging donations to bail out criminals, many of whom were charged with violent crimes. They are the faces of a party that have abandoned the safety of our communities in favor of appeasing a far-left mob.
The gentleman from New York, listening to him speak, you would think that we're living in the 14th century Europe during the Black Plague. The fact is that we live in the best place in the world. There's no other place in the world I'd rather live in than in the United States of America. And it's the best time in history, quite frankly, for a whole bunch of reasons. And the gentleman, please don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say that none of our soldiers were in harm's way. I said we were living in a time where we were not at war with any country. That's what I said. I have to insist on accuracy when it comes to my words. But we can do better, and we should work to improve the lives of the people we represent. Crime is down. The gentleman from New York who just spoke apparently wasn't here when I inserted the FBI report. But that's facts. Crime is down. The economy is strong and growing stronger. Science is improving our lives in new ways every single day. It's amazing. The Republican agenda of division and hate only takes us backwards. So let's go forward. Let's work together on something. And maybe we can start today, rather than politicizing the tragic deaths of American servicemen, maybe we can start the day today by actually helping our veterans, something that my Republican friends have a hard time trying to do. Madam Speaker, I'm going to urge that we defeat the previous question. And if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to include an additional $12 billion in the continuing resolution that our nation's veterans need for their health care. Madam Speaker, let's remember how we got here. Republicans talked a big game all Congress about how they were going to return to regular order and pass 12 individual appropriation bills. But consistent with the theme of dysfunction for this Republican majority, they instead spent months fighting amongst themselves. And what was the result? How many awful, partisan, go-nowhere appropriation bills were they actually able to pass? 5. 5 out of 12. And they didn't even send the Homeland Appropriations Bill over to the Senate. Why? Because they threw a tantrum and refused to send their Homeland Appropriation bills to the Senate unless their awful H.R. 2 border bill got signed into law. That's not how this works. You guys need to watch Schoolhouse Rock. Maybe you can learn something. So once again, Democrats are the adults in the room who are being asked to come in and clean up the Republican mess. In this case, to ensure that our basic responsibility of governing is met, keeping the lights on. Keeping the lights on. Now, the continuing resolution that we will consider later this week has some good pieces in it, and it will keep the American people's government open for another 3 months. But there's always room for improvement, and that is why I am offering this amendment to provide an extra $12 billion to maintain medical care for veterans, money that the Department of Veterans Affairs say that they will need. Our veterans deserve our support. It is our responsibility to provide the care that they've earned. And Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record, along with any extraneous materials immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And Madam Speaker, to discuss our proposal, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. DeLuzio.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for yielding time. This country has a sacred obligation to America's veterans, to my fellow veterans. It's a promise that after we complete our service in uniform to this great nation, our government will in turn deliver the care and benefits that we have earned. For too long, this promise has been broken for so many of my fellow veterans. And finally, we are making some progress. The Honoring Our PACT Act and the Cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund have helped my fellow toxic exposed veterans and their survivors get the health care and benefits they've long earned but only recently were offered. More veterans than ever are now receiving life-changing benefits. Over the last 2 years, VA has approved more than 1.2 million PACT Act claims, and the Veterans Health Administration is expected to serve 127 million appointments by the end of this year. That's 7 million more than 2023. The growth in the number of claims and appointments has outpaced VA's initial estimates, causing the funding shortfall that the gentleman from Massachusetts alluded to. I say it's about time that more of my fellow veterans receive the care we've earned. It's our sacred obligation here in this chamber, in this Congress, to ensure our veterans are taken care of. And that includes paying for the cost of war. We've got to make sure the VA is fully staffed, it's modernized, it's able to meet the needs of my fellow veterans. And while there's no funding shortfall for this fiscal year, next year we expect the Veterans Health Administration to cross that red line around March of 2025. That's exactly why the now failed Republican 6-month CR proposal last week would have been a disaster. Since the current proposed CR goes until December, we have time to address this $12 billion shortfall. So we're submitting this amendment to appropriate $12 billion for the VA Cost of War Toxic Exposure Fund. Caring for veterans is part of the cost of war, and patriotic Americans expect us to pay for it. We cannot have veterans miss out on the hard-earned benefits they earn through their service, and we cannot send Americans off to war and then pinch pennies when the bill comes due, especially when billionaires and huge corporations don't pay their fair share in taxes in this country. House Democrats are committed to getting veterans the health care and the benefits that we are owed. And that was the PACT Act's commitment, and we intend to keep that promise. I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so we can keep this country's obligation. Madam Speaker, I yield back.